when I started researching and visiting more colleges, I started to realize that you could probably get a really solid education at almost any institution, but where were you going to really fit in and thrive? That was the harder thing. I was craving more of that user generated content, that insider kind of students giving you the real authentic truth. And I felt like the more people I was talking to, they were just kind of shrugging their shoulders and saying, I don't know, I just went there and it kind of worked out. But I was like, wow, this is a really expensive 4-year decision. Stays with you, stays with your family. There has to be kind of a better way. And I felt like at the time, the internet was just starting to really increase in popularity. Was there a way to just kind of modernize this whole process?
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Office Hours. My name's Will Geiger, co-founder of Scholarships 360. And on Office Hours, we're unpacking the latest in higher education trends and what those trends mean for students, parents, and educators. I'm really excited about today's guest, the CEO and founder of Niche, Luke Skurman. Welcome, Luke.
Thanks, Will. It's great to be here. Appreciate the invite.
Yeah. So to kick things off, Luke, I would love to hear a little bit about the founding story of Niche. I think I'd shared with you before this conversation that I actually was one of the writers in a very early version of when Niche was College Prowler and you're still doing guidebooks, like physical guidebooks, if you can believe that. I would love to hear a little bit more about the founding story of, I guess, College Prowler.
Sure. I love your College Prowler, Wake Forest connection. That's so cool. So a couple things. So I was born in Manhattan. We moved to San Francisco when I was very young. I went to a public high school in Marin County, just over the Golden Gate Bridge. And I just kind of wanted to get out of California. I didn't want to go to UC Berkeley, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, UC San Diego, great public schools, great UCs and Cal State schools, but wanted to kind of fly away a little bit, go closer to East Coast, get closer to cousins, uncles, grandparents. And so my high school counselor really told me at the time, hey, not a lot of our alumni are looking at those colleges. You're kind of on your own. And I said, okay, that's fine. I'm still interested in these schools. And I started doing the research and going on all the tours and the visits. And there were a couple key things that really struck me. The first was I felt a lot of the content, whether that was in other guidebook companies, the Fisk Guide, the Princeton Review, U.S. News and World Report, I felt like it was all focused exclusively on the academics, and I was craving a lot of information on the non-academics, the dorms, the dining, Greek life, parking, security, computers, athletics. I felt like this whole experience that you get in 4 years is really important. And it's not just about the academics. And when I started researching and visiting more colleges, I started to realize that you could probably get a really solid education at almost any institution, but where were you going to really fit in and thrive? That was the harder thing. So that was kind of number one. Number two was I felt that there was the admissions staff, and then I felt like there was these authors or these guidebooks. And I was craving more of that user-generated content, that insider kind of students giving you the real authentic truth. This was just as the beginning as Yelp and TripAdvisor were starting to come along. And then the third realization was, wow, like I ended up going to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it occurred to me that this was this big decision. I was moving 3,000 miles across the country. I was going to spend 4 years of my life. My parents were putting up a lot of money to help me go there. It leads to friends. It leads to a job. It leads to a network. But this was this big decision that shaped me, shaped my family. And I felt like the more people I was talking to, they were just kind of shrugging their shoulders and saying, I don't know, I just went there and it kind of worked out. But I was like, wow, this is a really expensive 4-year decision. Stays with you, stays with your family. There has to be kind of a better way. And I felt like at the time, the internet was just starting to really increase in popularity. Was there a way to just kind of modernize this whole process? And so to take it a touch further, kind of to make it a little bit more contextual for you, I always loved books. I always loved the Cliffs Notes guides and the Spark Notes guides. I also loved these Zagat dining guidebooks on New York City dining restaurants in San Francisco. And so the idea was, could we build one book on one college? So one book on Harvard, one book on Stanford, one book on Wake Forest. It kind of covered the 20 sections of every college, academics, parking, security, and create kind of this formula where, let's say it was parking. Are freshmen allowed to park on campus? Yes or no? Cost of a parking permit, $60. Best place to park on campus, East Campus Garage. A few student quotes and a letter grade summarizing their satisfaction with parking, and treat all the key aspects of student life the same for every college. And we, so the day after I graduated, in May of 2002, so it's about 24 years ago, I started running the company full time. And all these internet companies were failing at the time. And so I wanted to generate real revenue. And so the idea was, could we publish physical books? So make that the main distribution arm. So that's all we did from '02 to '07 was publish books. We hired student authors and editors at the various campuses. Um, and then again, I love books, but one of our largest customers was Borders Books. Borders went bankrupt. Private equities bought Barnes and Nobles. Could see that families and students were progressively going to the internet more and more for their information. Then we tried digitizing the content and charging for online access, kind of like a Consumer Reports. It was modestly successful. And then we finally kind of said, we got to make all this free, and we've got to figure out how to kind of make a free model work with partnerships with banking, helping to drive checking accounts, helping to drive Army and Navy ROTC recruitment, and then helping to drive undergraduate recruitment as well. And so that's kind of the journey at a high level. I'm happy to pause there of kind of how the business for the first kind of 10 years came to be.
Yeah, no, I love hearing that, and just having to also just adapt to like what was going on in the world and how people were consuming information, distribution. That's all really just fascinating to hear. And just as a someone who started, I started this close to 16 years ago, and have run it full time for 6 of those years. Just to also appreciate the focus on trying to make it sustainable from day one, which is I know not always the model when it comes to high growth businesses, where it can be like growth and then profitability second. And it sounds like profitability and sustainability, that was really like baked into the DNA from day one.
It was, I would say that the market also speaks where, yeah, it was hard to raise capital as a publishing company that started to see its revenues flatten out as well. So we kind of had to figure out how to survive. Yeah. And I felt like we developed like what I internally call kind of a survivor mindset. We found a way to survive one more year. And what kept fueling me was that people kept telling us we had great content, it was really helpful. And we just kept trying to figure out the business model. But yeah, some of it was intentionality. Some of it was just what the market forces gave us.
Yeah, and just love Luke, you hitting on the some of the other factors that students are considering when choosing a college. And when I was on the high school counseling side, like saw that very, very firsthand. It was just like this very big, stressful, high stakes, expensive decision. And students, they're making it, oftentimes with incomplete information about finances. They're, you know, only like 17 years old. It's hard to know exactly like what you might be projecting down the line. And something like College Prowler, and having it just, I imagine, would be very hard just to get information especially if you're like that kid in California who was looking to go to school in Pittsburgh. You might not know anyone who's a current student at Carnegie Mellon or alumni. Just made that information gathering process even more stressful. Just have always really, really appreciated that, as part of the value proposition for College Prowler and now Niche. And I'm curious, what remind me, when did the transition from College Prowler to Niche, when did that happen in the timeline of the business?
So the brand was College Prowler from 2002 to 2013. And then we decided to change brands in 13 to niche. One of our favorite definitions out of the dictionary is a place, employment, status, or activity for which a person or thing is best fitted. And that's literally the definition of niche. We were able to buy a 5-letter domain name and we rebranded. Students loved the name College Prowler, but advertisers didn't like it, the media didn't like it, colleges didn't like it. I think everyone felt like it was juvenile. And we had
Right.
aspirations to go beyond college. We owned these other domains like High School Prowler or City Prowler or Job Prowler. It just didn't sound like the right corporate kind of name to go into multiple decisions. And from an SEO perspective, we thought that one kind of unifying larger brand was the way to go. 2013, we rebranded as Niche, and then we enter our second vertical, which was K through 12 research. And we realized that there was 120,000 K through 12 schools. There wasn't a lot of great content, and yeah, it was really, we said, could we bring our model of user generated content, ranking, statistics, facts to the K through 12 market? And we wanted to see if we could kind of expand the market and help more people with these big school decisions. So 13, we rebranded and we entered K through 12. 2014, then, as kind of an offshoot of K through 12, we realized that families that were thinking about schools were also thinking about where to live, and that the price of a home is often correlated to the quality of the school district. So then by 14, we entered places to live. So we have content on 80,000 cities, neighborhoods, suburbs. So pretty much every place to live, every school, and every college in the country is on our platform now.
Yeah, no. Well, personally found that my wife and I were living in Brooklyn, moved to be closer to where I grew up in New Jersey last year, and that was definitely part of our research process. And you know, interesting calling out that it was like it was the town, but it was also the schools, which like those two things are interrelated. But found Niche to be a helpful resource for just thinking about that. Just because again, I think that's another can be kind of opaque trying to find information and assessing not only just like the hard stats, but just like kind of the vibe or the feel of the place that you're looking for, which is helpful. And that yeah, appreciate more of the company timeline. I always find that interesting. Were there any concerns? Like I guess there's switching to a new domain, were there any concerns like SEO or brand wise that was going to that was going to be like a risk at all, or did you feel confident in the time just that this kind of consolidation play was going to be the winning strategy with the Google algorithms?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit of a concern, and I thought that we did a good job of doing the best we could up front to try to mitigate it. I'd say externally, whether it's Google, whether it's the media, whether just how we were phrasing things ourselves, I think it was a little bit confusing probably for about a year, maybe 18 months, and then it slowly became kind of a non-issue. But yeah, it was a little bit kind of something you had to really watch closely for a bit there, but I think we navigated it really well.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, on a much, 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 much smaller scale. When my brother and I started this, we had a scholarship 360 and then admissions 360, and I think like maybe like one other. But just realized that two of us doing this as a part time thing, we were stretched too thin. But yeah, and I think it's just also just like interesting responding to certain trends in SEO, and obviously how what how people are discovering information. I think at a point like that was a little bit more in vogue, just all of these kind of separate like micro domains almost. So to segue into another, I think big initiative or trend in the industry that Niche has been a big part of. I want to talk a little bit about direct admissions and just can you like where I guess Niche's involvement in direct admissions and creating a product and both for students and for institutions, what problem do you see this solving for both students and institutions, and just what were the origins of that? Just because it strikes me as a really big part of the niche identity now in higher ed.
Yeah. So there were a couple things that all kind of converged at once. So one was, we survey admissions teams and we surveyed families, both sides of the market were really stressed out. Like the admissions team was always stressed out about landing their class. The families about choosing the right school, about figuring this whole process out, especially if you're first gen or you're the first student in the family. It's just a stressful process. It just is. There's no way to sugarcoat that. And then kind of kept pulling on the thread. I realized that it was hard to, it felt like we weren't getting the credit for the impact that we were having on the industry. And that kind of gnawed at me a little bit. And then I also realized that 70% of colleges have an 80% acceptance rate. Everybody talks about Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. They're phenomenal institutions, but there's only about 200 colleges in the entire country that have an acceptance rate below 50%. And and then I said, yeah, I mean, this generation, they're so upset and stressed out about this. Like, we just need to be thinking about this differently here. There's a couple pilot schools that we worked with initially. One here in Pittsburgh, right by the airport, called Robert Morris University, and then a Catholic school outside of Baltimore called Mount St. Mary's University. And basically went to Robert Morris and was like, hey guys, I had a great relationship with their president at the time, Dr. Chris Howard. He's now at Arizona State. But we had this big meeting with VP of Student Life, VP of Marketing, VP of Enrollment, and Chris. And I said, okay, here's a crazy idea, guys, but I want you to just accept the students and I want to give them an upfront scholarship. And they're like, what are you talking about? I said, guys, you have about an 85% acceptance rate and about a 12% yield. Like, you work so hard and you basically admit the vast majority of your class, and then 1 out of 10 of those admits ends up enrolling. I said, could we just think about this totally differently? They said, oh, we just simplified our whole process. I said, I went on your website this morning and it's still stressful, guys. There's different requirements for different majors. It's this, it's that. I said, I'm talking about a total paradigm shift here. And they said, and why the scholarship? I said, why the scholarship? Because the list price is very intimidating to families. Once you get north of about 25K, a lot of families just shut down. They don't understand that there's discounts or that there's scholarships or there's net tuition. They just don't understand. So I'm not looking to erode your tuition revenue, but I'm just looking to lead with a scholarship that's more in line with your net tuition revenue. So, so they rolled out late in cycle and it worked well. They were excited. They're like, wow, you got us some students we would not have gotten. This was really exciting. And then we kept pulling on it. Then the next fall, we got to about 25 schools, kept pulling on it, 91 schools. And so today we're at about 170 colleges are using direct admissions. We're driving probably about 10% of those freshmen are coming through Niche's direct admissions, and it continues to grow. And it's exciting. Yeah. I mean, I think it's pro student. The student feels wanted. They feel less stressed. They feel clear about there's still steps they need to go take, like they need to upload their transcript, they need to fill out an onboarding form, they may need to deposit. But the thought was, this is a generation that can press a button to get an Uber, to have Uber Eats delivered to their house. They don't want to wait 4 months, 6 months for to see if they've been admitted. They want it instantaneous. They want it now. They want to feel wanted. And as someone that has buying leverage, they're signing up for a pretty expensive decision, and they have a lot more leverage than I think the college has always appreciated. And I thought that the power dynamic needed to shift a little bit towards the families. And yeah, is the product perfect? No, but we're excited about it. I mean, Time Magazine named it one of the best inventions in 2024, continuing to see a lot of activity, and we're leaning in here. Yeah, we're bullish on it.
Yeah, no, I think as an observer, I really love the scholarship component of it, and just think, for institutions, they just have this opportunity to use those dollars as like a marketing tool even earlier on in the process, and just get kids excited, you know, show that cost earlier on, which that should be serve to their benefit in the process. Just as students, I think ideally you could envision a world where maybe your college list is a little bit shorter just because you actually have options that are predictable, both in terms of admissions and cost, earlier on in the process, and you just don't need to apply to so many schools, which I think is really interesting. I think taking a step back, it's always been fascinating to me, how I think a lot of higher ed, I think, does try to copy what like the most selective schools are doing. And do you think that, just curious your take, do you think that's where some of this like came from, as far as like every school just having these, very complicated, rigid admissions processes and financial aid awarding processes, when maybe they didn't need to do that because they were just in fact accepting the majority of applicants?
I don't know how or why it happened. I guess my instincts tell me it's probably correlated to the rise of the Common App, where there's probably now 1,100, 1,200 schools where you can apply. And I think that the number of applications has increased, and the noise to signal, though, has gotten a lot worse. And so I think that the whole process has just gotten noisier for everyone. Yeah, I think some people do need to take a step back and say, does this really make sense for us? For sure.
Yeah, no, I think I remember when we went, I was at Kenyon College in admissions, and when we removed the supplements to our Common App, the next year, I think applications just like went up like 63%. And that was awesome until we just realized that yield is going to be just an absolute like nightmare, because now we're missing this really, really, really important signal as far as the interest in a student. And that was definitely challenging. I know before we hopped on, we were just talking, yield is like a big, one of the kind of top concerns, for deans and VPs of enrollment. I'm curious, like, is that something you guys have been thinking about in the context of direct admissions? Like, I guess this, like the fit and interest part, on communicating that from the students to the colleges.
A couple things. So one, I think that what direct admissions does unequivocally well is it produces a lot of top of funnel. So you're getting a lot of students interested. As the enrollment cliff is here and it's harder to find top of funnel, it's doing it pretty darn efficiently and getting a lot of interest. If there's criticism for it, it's could it be yielding a little bit better? It's probably fair criticism. And yeah, at some schools the yield is comparable to their other non-direct admissions efforts. In other schools, maybe it's a little bit worse. So I think it gnawed at me that, okay, we kind of maybe figured out the top of funnel. Maybe we got to figure out the bottom of the funnel here. And that issue of bottom of the funnel, it's not applicable only to DA schools, to direct admission schools. It's applicable to almost everyone. As I pulled this back, there are only 60 colleges in the entire United States that have a yield over 40%. So almost everybody is kind of congealing around about a 20% yield. Almost everybody's congealing in that 20% range. And so, yeah, when 1 out of 5 of your admits is coming, but the 4 out of 5 are not, it's becoming this hard thing to solve, and everybody feels that. So we've developed a new suite of tools that we call Advance AI that really matches the tone of the universities and colleges' voice. They're on niche, and we're helping to guide them down the funnel and taking these really smart contextualized next steps to help them really go down the funnel smartly and more innately. And the initial results are really exciting. The view rate and the click-through rate is really high. So yeah, we're excited to unlock kind of some of those advanced features, those yield features to direct admissions, getting that combination to work really well with each other. But we're also rolling out the advanced tool suite to all of our clients, even those that are not on direct admissions.
Yeah, I'm curious, what is the if I'm like let's say a high school senior right now, I'm weighing my options, like what would that look like for me through the niche student experience?
Yeah, so they're on Niche. They raised their hand and they said, "Hey, I'm interested in Wake Forest University." And then in their Niche inbox or on their My College's dashboard, they'll start to get some messages that say something like, "Hey, have you thought about applying or have you thought about scheduling your visit?" There are these smart little things that the student starts to receive to help them take that next step action. And then we're starting to sync up with the school's CRM and we can see exactly where they are in the funnel. And then we can refine those messages even clearer and even tighter right now.
No, I like that, and thinking about, like, affordability and scholarships in my mind, like, goes directly to, like, FAFSA completion, CSS profile, and just, like, that just seems like such a win-win both for, colleges, making sure that students are taking care of all their, necessary financial aid, docs, and then obviously for the students, like, you're gonna need that to get access your full funding at the school, and, for a lot of kids, they're just, like, not gonna be able to attend if just for whatever reason they don't submit the CSS profile at a school that requires that. And obviously, like looking at the data on high school counselor to student ratio, and just a lot of kids, just counselors do great work, but just a lot of kids like just may not have access to a counselor in the way that they might need them.
Yeah, totally. I think the ratio is like 300
Yeah,
students for every counselor in the United States. Yeah. Yeah, so we're just trying to do more. And we also realize that the admissions teams are overworked. And how can we just give them more leverage without needing this giant setup and all this work and another giant system to have to manage?
yeah, I think more broadly, that's one of the things I'm really excited about for with like tech and AI at admissions offices. I was telling someone recently, I can't remember how many, like, just the hours I spent recalculating GPAs when I was at Kenyon, and we would recalculate every GPA. I had my second monitor and a specific, like, Excel formula that I was using, and that, like, time now, because you could do that with tools, can just be used, proactively reaching out to students, spending time with families, creating content, and, most admissions people do not get into the profession to do a lot of data entry like that. So they wanna be building relationships, and I think at so many schools like that, there's just that unlocks that capacity and that opportunity, which was exciting.
Well, yeah, big opportunity to spend more time with the families. I think it's still, yeah, early innings on how AI can give that extra leverage, but I think there's definitely opportunity for sure, and it's going to keep coming.
Yeah, Luke, I'm curious to segue to the student experience a little bit. I'm curious how you just like looking ahead, maybe 5 or 10 years. How do you think students will discover colleges, or I guess just higher education, differently than they do today, or how do you see this evolving?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking 5 or 10 years, I guess a couple things. So one is, the so there was a there's a the old school term is called SEO or search engine optimization. The new school term is either called AEO or GEO, which is answer engine optimization. Or there's all these new ways to describe what's going on with the shift to kind of AI overviews or to Claude or to ChatGPT. But I think that um, what is fair is that in these new platforms, they are likely to answer more of their questions. And then they're also is likely to have less clicks going back to certain sites, including the university's own websites. So I think it's really important that schools or websites like ours continue to answer the right questions and make sure that the visibility is really high in all these new answer models. That being said, I think there's a level of depth and detail as again, you're ready to spend 100, 200, $300,000 on a decision for 4 years of your life where you're craving even more detail that I don't fully believe a chat GPT is always going to give you for this level of detail. Um, but I could see a scenario where there are agents on Niche there potentially is an avatar where, again, it almost could look like your counselor and you're talking to it and it's helping you. I know there's mediums right now where you could have AI almost act as your therapist, and you don't have to go see a medical professional, but you spend $5 and you have this AI therapy. There's derivatives of that I could see where you're talking to AI and it's helping you map out your list of schools, or it's helping you narrow it down and get there. So I think that the kind of the top of funnel, I think, is going to change, but then I think it's going to be how you continue to kind of bring the student all the way down for all the points of the journey, whether that's, again, the financial aid, the FAFSA, scheduling the visit, making it as seamless and as frictionless as possible, throughout all these steps that can take a long time. I think that's going to be the opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense. I think just you think about that complexity, and there's just so many opportunities for students to get off track or slip through the cracks, and especially I think like first generation students or students who might not have like a ton of support or in their school. The deck is kind of stacked against them, and it just seems like different technology and tools just provide a way of really short circuiting that and simplifying it. Um, I know that Niche has also been, and you've been thinking about just college like cost, and I want to make sure I'm getting the terminology right. True cost, that's the new product. Yeah, would you be able to share a little bit more about that? I'm just curious how that's going. I still remember working in admissions when they rolled out the net price calculator through the government, which I think has some warts, but was like a meaningful step forward as far as price transparency. And just curious what you guys are working on.
Yeah. So, again, going back to we survey about 10,000 students a year. Right now, the number one fear, issue, concern is about the affordability, the perceived ROI, the value of college right now. And so when we unpack this, there were a couple things emerged. So one was that the colleges admitted that they were having a hard time conveying their value prop. Hey, not everyone pays list price, and there's discounts and there's scholarships, and we're a great value. And then the families are also saying, yeah, I mean, we don't know what it really costs. It's really hard to compare apples to apples. So we were hearing that both sides of the market were really stressed about this. The net price calculators, I think, are healthy. The problem that we were seeing were a couple things. One is that when you look at the terms of service, there wasn't a way to centralize all net price calculators on one website. So you'd have to go do a net price on college A, college B, college C, college D, college E. And we said, wow, that's a little bit crazy. We also found out that they may have a legal requirement to have one, but they weren't always keeping them up to date. So we went out and said, okay, can we use some data? We got some great data from College Aid Pro. We used some data ourselves. We personalized things for using AI. Again, like cost of insurance, cost of an apartment, cost of different things can actually vary quite differently by zip code. And set out to build, a real apples to apples cost comparison against multiple schools, looking at the cost, looking at the value, looking at how much your projected earnings will be. And it's early days, but it's exciting. I mean, we've had great coverage in the New York Times and Inside Higher Ed. It's not, again, not perfect yet, but there is definitely something flickering that's quite exciting here, and we're going to keep pulling on the string right now. We want to make sure we're never going to be as accurate as the university's own kind of aid offering, but we want to get directionally pretty darn accurate, and we're getting pretty close there. And we think that this is a chance to build a better list up front that's really in tune with the family's actual budgets. I think there was a stat I read recently that I think 35 or 40% of college freshmen at four-year schools do not return their second year. And the
Hmm.
biggest reason is around affordability and cost issues. Can we get in upfront and make sure that that fit is better upfront for everybody, eyes wide open? But yeah, this is kind of something that we're beginning to work on in its early days. But it's got tens of thousands of users already, and it's starting to scale.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. I mean, I think it is just it's so wild to me just for students. They're sitting there. I remember it was on the high school side, just to be kids who'd come into my office and they get all the decisions at the end of March or whatever. And then like literally you have like, 20, 30 days to do all the visits, do your, all while you're doing your schoolwork, analyze all these financial aid packages that are all different. Some of them are very, very confusing, and just like make this decision with your family in like short order. And of course, you'd hope that everyone have done the net price calculator, but and had everything really like buttoned up and figured out. But I get those are just like not the it's not a great system where you have to go from every school to every school and every school, and sometimes the information is not easily accessible. So yeah, really love that. And yeah, I think there's interesting implications there just as far as retention and just like fixing some of the leaky buckets at some of these institutions, and just like easier just to maybe fix that at the source, and ensure that students are there attending a school that actually is like financially doable for their family, versus families that maybe they make it stretch for the first year, but it really is just not feasible over that 4 years.
Absolutely. So we're committed to poking on that and trying to provide better clarity and better transparency for sure.
No, I love that. And last question, Luke, and this is kind of a big one. I'm just curious. If you could redesign the admissions process entirely from a student first perspective, not that you don't have enough time to go through the whole thing, but what would you change first?
I guess what maybe it's just piggybacking off recency bias, what we were just talking about. I do think the somehow getting these costs clear up front, for everybody standardized, it's a big opportunity for everyone. I mean, imagine you're buying a car and going to the dealership and they said it's $50,000, and all of a sudden it's like, are you paying 40, you're paying 30, you're paying 25, you don't know what's going on. It's just not clear. I think that somehow making that all clear up front for everybody, I think would really behoove everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially just, taking into account like many students may not graduate in 4 years. Maybe it takes them 5 years. Maybe they transfer. Maybe the school, the tuition board of trustees decides to raise tuition by a certain amount. I know some schools lock that in, but there's just like so many other variables that are also, that are really, really hard to predict. So, at the very least, kind of getting that upfront cost for freshman year earlier on seems like seems fair. And also I think seems like it's in the school's self-interest, just when you look at how high discount rates are and they just continue to tick up, that there's a lot more aid than you would think, which should be great for families and students as consumers. Well, really appreciate the time, Luke. This has been a great conversation. Excited to share this with the community. We'll definitely drop some of the links of some of the really interesting work that you and the team at Niche are working on below. So yeah, really appreciate you joining us for office hours.
Yeah, it was nice to be on the the podcast today. Thanks for having me, and yeah, wish you well, and thanks for the time today.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Thanks everyone for tuning in to another episode of Office Hours with Will Geiger. If you're a student or parent, don't forget to check out app.scholarships360.org, where you can sign up for our free scholarship matching platform. For colleges, we've got solutions to make your work easier, which you can check out at connect.scholarships360.org. And one last thing, if you or someone you know would make a great guest on the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can always reach me by email or on LinkedIn. Until next time, thanks again for listening.